Part 70. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 701. The old man walked very peacefully, the footprints on his face were still so clear, and there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, as if he was lying on the bed surrounded by relatives and went ahead. No one knows whether the old man chose Subai simply because he wanted to help Subai, who was irritated with him, get promoted, or because he wanted to take revenge on Sun Hai, who wanted to use him as a stepping stone for promotion. Or, the old man just wanted to take revenge on Subai for treating him. That kick in the face. Just as Subai didn't know why Brother Nine didn't open the bronze box in front of him when he went to find him, with the death of the old man, it was completely unknown what the old man had been thinking. The dead are the best at keeping secrets and can often drive the living crazy. The reverse flow of time disappeared. With the death of the old man, this node began to truly collapse. This area began to become very mottled. Moreover, it was clear that this time, it was no longer the last time he teased Sunday High was lying like that, but this time, it was true. Node. It's really starting to fall apart. Subai's promotion was suspended because of this, but everyone knew that this kind of thing would never stop. We have achieved 90% success, only the last 10% is left, the last step is left. At this time, who wants to fail? Who is willing to fail? But Subai really noticed that the assistance and counter-current aura around him had stopped. He was now standing on the last step. When he stepped up, the sea and the sky were vast. But now, with the death of the old man, he was no longer the same person. It is so easy to simply stand still, but now my whole vigorous momentum is showing signs of flagging. I am now like a boat against the current. If I can't continue to move forward, I can only fall down. 90% is very high, but after all, you haven't succeeded yet. You haven't taken that step yet. Even if you are in a very high position now, it is already the result of trying to get everything out of yourself. Everything is blocked. Just like a person who goes to a foreign casino to sign a bill, everything is lost unless he wins back the bet. There was a look of pain on Subai's face. He was trying to hold on to his energy, but there was no way. At this time, he had put everything he could use into it, up to 90%. If the old man is not dead, with his help, Subai still has a chance to forcefully jump over and cross the last 10%. However, the old man is dead and has lost external help. Subai now uses force to support him. The result turned out to be that the falling speed of his breath became slightly slower. In half a minute at most, 90% would slowly drop to 80%. I cannot be reconciled. Subai gritted his teeth and said, I'm really not willing to give in. I'm really not willing to give in. Suddenly, Subai's mind flashed back to the image of him being thrown under the rusty faucet in the hospital bathroom by the boy and girl when he was a newborn, and the family photo in which he stood dazedly with the talisman stuck on him appeared in his mind. The scene there showed the scene where the little one was missing when he returned home. No matter how much reluctance, no matter how much unwillingness, no matter how much anger, at this time, it all seems a little pale and weak. Man can conquer nature, which is the most advanced chicken soup for the soul. In fact, no matter how bold a person is, he will have great achievements. It turned out to be nothing more than a joke. Even if Subai had tried his best, he still had to face the end of failure at this moment. Sun Hai had been deceived into committing suicide, and Subai himself was really at the end of his rope. Dabai, hold on, there's still a chance. The fat man suddenly shouted at this time. Subai looked at the fat man. He saw that the fat man was making a secret, obviously planning to trigger the magic circle, but what was the use of the magic circle now? To relieve yourself of pain? Make dying less uncomfortable? Damn it, I'm helping you this time, which means that all the previous friendships have been wiped out. In the past, I stole the little guy to hand in the task myself, and I cheated you once, and then I almost cheated you and the monk Buddha. They died in Shanghai. Suburbia, this time, at least to you, Fatty, I'm going to pay it off. With you, Fatty doesn't even have a sip of soup. From today on, you are your senior audience. Fatty finds a place where no one is around to try his luck. Next time we meet, don't show mercy to anyone. There is no need to talk about kindness. The fat man roared as he turned his attention to the dead old man sitting quietly over there. 5 elements formation, alchemy fills the gap. The fat man opened his hands, and 3 circles of red light enveloped the dead old man with the dead old man as the center. Then the flames rose up and began to burn the old man's body. Everything here is fake. This is what the old man once said to Subai. Because everything here is fake, when the old man threw the jade seal to Subai, when he talked to Subai about I have been ordered by God to live long and prosperous, Subai could not see the jade seal, only a piece of handkerchief. When he realized who the girl and the man and the woman were, Subai looked back, but could no longer find any trace of them. Because this is a false area, it can't even be called a space. Here, it's just a dream, a mistake, a misunderstanding, an accident. But here, at least one thing is true, and that is gold. There is a piece of gold here, which once had the honor to make up for the shortcomings of the ancestral dragon jade seal. Now the ancestral dragon jade seal has disappeared, but the piece of gold is still here. The old man's body slowly vaporized and drifted away, disappearing without a trace, but the old man's wheelchair gradually began to appear golden in color while melting. This gold letter. It was actually hidden in his wheelchair. The fat man was operating the magic circle while watching the changing scene in front of him. When he really saw the golden metallic color appear, his face also showed surprise. Real. It's really right here. That piece of gold that once mended the ancestral dragon jade seal, is actually here. Suddenly, the fat man seemed to realize something. When he was setting up the formation, the old man kept looking at him calmly. Before, the fat man was still wondering if this guy couldn't see what formation he was setting up, but looking back now, Fatty understands that he actually made a huge mistake. Since this piece of gold can support this mysterious node, how can his understanding of the formation be superficial and one-sided? When he maliciously arranged a formation to smelt dead soul monsters around him, how could he not see his intentions? But he still looked at himself calmly as he slowly finished setting up the formation. He didn't say anything or did anything, he just looked at himself calmly. Then, he died so peacefully again. He said that Subai's promotion was less difficult than him. He also said that he wanted to take revenge on Sun Hai for making Sun Hai become someone else's wedding dress. So, how could he die so easily and peacefully at the last critical moment when Subai had completed 9 achievements? Even for the elderly in the real world, many people really die after finishing the urgent things in their hearts in one breath. Did he see through something when he left so peacefully, or was he already prepared for something? As Fatty's formation continued to be blessed, the wheelchair completely melted, and a piece of gold the size of a little finger slowly floated up. It exuded a soft light. Although it was not the traditional jade seal that Zalong held to smash the black dragon, it was a part of it, and its life was destined to be sad. No war refines stones to mend the sky, and the remaining stone can still have a chance to walk in the world of mortals, achieving the joys and sorrows of a dream of red mansions. However, this piece of gold could not keep up with Zalong's all-powerful era. Although it has become a legend, it is part of the national jade seal, but its existence is more like a stain on the national jade seal. Later, as he was born with wisdom and learned to think, he may have become more and more doubtful about his own existence and also doubted his own existence. There are many entanglements about the meaning of existence. Go back to where you came from. At the beginning, I was born as a supplement to the jade seal passed down from the country, So today, I will end myself by becoming a supplement again. How come you go? This is the funeral and ending that the old man chose for himself. Gold is easy to refine, because when the old man died, he directly wiped out all the spiritual energy in his body. The current piece of gold is the purest source of energy for anyone to pick. Sudbai opened his palm and grasped it, and the gold turned into golden liquid and floated over, directly integrating into Sudbai's body. For a moment, Sudbai's skin began to shine, and his whole aura also instantly climbed up. Boom! There was a muffled sound in the void, and Sudbai's whole body suddenly became enlightened. Succeeded. Advanced listener. The fat man waved his hands and the formation ended. He looked at the area that was burned into black in a daze. He suddenly felt that even if the old man did not choose to help him get promoted but chose to help Sudbai get promoted, the old man actually gave him, there are also many, the tranquility of death and the final arrangement of one's own ending. Don't these completely conform to the cause and effect? Why is there only fear, panic, and dead ends in calculating cause and effect? The image of the old man dying with his face turned slightly to one side and dying peacefully kept appearing in Fatty's mind. Suddenly, Fatty felt that he understood something. Sudbai's floating feet slowly landed on the ground, making fists with both hands, feeling the completely different power surging in his body. This. Is it the power of advanced listeners? At the same time, in a Chinese language class in a middle school in China, an elderly Chinese teacher was asking the students in his class to read aloud a classical Chinese text. In the winter of the first year of Qin Ziying, Pagong Lu Bang's army went to Ba, and Ying knelt down holding the jade seal and presented it to the left side of Xianyang Road. Qin died. It was passed down that the national seal belonged to Lu Han. At the end of the Western Han dynasty, his relative Wang Mang usurped power. At that time, the child was young, and the seal was hidden in Chang'an. At the palace of the Empress Dowager, Wang Mang sent his brother Wang Shun to retrieve it. The Empress Dowager was angry and threw the seal to the ground, breaking a corner of it. Wang Mang ordered craftsmen to repair it with gold. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 702. The nodes have completely collapsed, like willow catkins scattered all over the sky, entering a rhythm of death in the strange and bizarre, with a sense of chilling. When everything disappears, the environment here becomes room number 233. Originally looked like a bed, 2 bed cabinets, a desk, a small TV and a very cramped bathroom. In the room, there were 2 people, Sudbai and Fatty. Sudbai stood there with his eyes closed, motionless. The fat man walked up to Sudbai and waved his hand, but Sudbai still didn't move. What's wrong with him? Fatty said to himself. If something went wrong with Dabai just after he was promoted to a senior audience, that would be too stupid. It would be like calling him a drop of nectar. That piece of gold died too suddenly. Although the power to reverse time is false, part of it still remains in him. You can forcefully wake him up now. At most, he will feel a little uncomfortable, but let him. If you stand here alone for a while, you can almost recover the residual soul of the princess, said in the fat man's heart. The fat man nodded. He understood what he meant. Jinzi helped Sudbai before, which was equivalent to giving Sudbai a powerful stimulant. The side effects have not passed yet. Of course, there is no danger to Sudbai. People who suffer from motion sickness have just been in a car for a long time, so taking it slow is enough. Why, no farewell, but you did him such a big favor and left without saying anything, Princess Kenhun said a little strangely when she saw the fat man opening the door and planning to leave. You don't have to worry about my affairs, the fat man scolded the remnant soul in his heart. Oh, you can't stay in my body for too long, it's too unlucky. Opening the door, the fat man walked out of room 233. When he walked out, he suddenly found that the magic circle outside the door was still there and still in operation. However, The magic circle here would not affect people who went out, but for those who come in, the impact will be huge. Mr. Lay, is he still there? The fat man is not very sure about this matter. He actually wants to talk to Mr. Lay about some things about the formation, but it is hard to say whether he is a bird or not. I don't know when he started to help the strong. The fat man who was proud of running errands actually had some aloof temper. The fat man thought for a while, he must have been infected by that mental illness. Shaking his head, the fat man didn't even go back to his room. He got off the elevator and went straight to the hotel entrance. There were still a few audience members sitting at the hotel reception desk. They hadn't left yet, but they stayed to wait and see the results. Seeing the fat man coming out, several people stood up. The fat man waved his hand, "Come on, brothers, go find a restaurant outside and eat," while saying, "Fat master, I'm starving to death. It's morning time now, and although it's close to noon, it's not yet time for morning tea." The news that the fat man had come out spread to all the listeners who were still here. Most of the listeners who were still here went directly outside to find the fat man who was having a dinner together, which caused the fat man to order a table. I couldn't sit down and had to change to a large private room. This is also because Fatty has good interpersonal relationships, so many listeners have great expectations to know some news from Fatty. In addition, except for a few people, the rest only know that after everyone is kicked out, only Fatty a person can still stay in that node. After Lu Tao learned about this, he did not follow the others to the restaurant outside to chat with the fat man. He went directly to Mr. Lay's room, but happened to see Mr. Lay slowly walking out pushing his small suitcase. "Mr. Lay, are you planning to leave? The nodes have collapsed. There is no point in me staying here anymore. It's better to go back first and make tea with the well water at home." Lu Tao took the initiative to help Mr. Lay lift the suitcase. This was not flattery. After all, Mr. Lay could afford Lu Tao to do this in terms of age and seniority. He was able to gather people to establish an audience for him when he was an experiencer. People still have this bit of vision. "That person came out," Lu Tao said, "but only one came out, that is Zhang Bai, the fat man." "Oh," Mr. Lay responded lightly, without any special reaction. "Mr. Lay, did you say he took out the magic weapon?" Lu Tao deliberately did not ask about Sun Hai. In fact, the matter was very simple, although he still cannot enter room 233 due to the formation. But now the node has collapsed. If Sun Hai had successfully advanced to the advanced audience level, he would have already come out and asked everyone to call him adult. There is no way he can't come out now, he simply can't help it. Well, now the result is very clear. Sun Hai failed and is probably in doubt. "It can't be taken out," Mr. Lay sighed casually. He knew that Lu Tao didn't understand this. Some knowledge must wait until at least an advanced audience can really come into contact with it, such as the things in the node. Its existence is not allowed by the rules of this real world. I can only play with it secretly, but it cannot appear in the hands of someone or the hands of the audience, because this thing cannot be seen in the light, but you can see the light if you want. Then it would have to be severely damaged and turned into a defective product, but then the meaning of taking it out and using it would be lost. Just like some chemicals, they can only be stored in sealed containers in the laboratory or in other special ways. They cannot be completely placed in the natural environment, otherwise they will soon react with water or oxygen in the air. Reaction spoiled. Lu Tao escorted Mr. Lay to the door. After watching Mr. Lay get into the taxi, he slowly stepped aside. Before the taxi drove away, Mr. Lay rolled down his window and looked at Lu Tao, who was still standing respectfully aside. "Human beings are not ruthless. Even if a dog is always considerate to you, you will give it to you. He throws bones quickly." "When do you plan to leave?" Mr. Lay asked. "Soon," Lu Tao replied. "Sun Hai has most likely died, so he must go back and handle matters in the forum early, which involves some redistribution of interests. I suggest you stay one more day and take a look. Mr. Lay smiled slightly. Do you still remember the guy in the black sportswear in the video? He is the same age as me. After saying this, Mr. Lay rolled up the window and signaled the driver to go to the airport. Lu Tao stood there and chewed Mr. Lay's last words in his mind. Mr. Lay's meaning was actually very simple, that is, the young man in black sportswear was also a high-level audience, but why did Mr. Lay didn't you know before? In Lu Tao's view, if the young man in black sportswear was also a high-level audience, the previous appearance and departure and the subsequent overlapping images would be easily explained. Human nature dictates that one is always curious and in awe of things unknown to oneself, and at the same time throws all kinds of possibilities and impossibilities over the head of that unknown thing. Lu Tao is naturally very envious of the level of high-level listeners, so it is natural that any incredible thing should happen to high-level listeners. This is just like the perception of ordinary people now when they look at senior people. In the eyes of ordinary people, senior people are really no different from gods. So, did Mr. Lay determine that that person was also a high-level listener after a lot of analysis? But why was he able to enter that node despite being an advanced listener? Although many details were mindlessly passed on to the advanced audience, there were still many things that did not make sense, and Lu Tao was too lazy to continue thinking about it. Sun Hai's death would certainly cause the management of the forum, including himself, to change his invested interests of members, but he still feels that compared with those, it is more cost-effective to make good friends with a young senior audience. After all, since Mr. Lay did not know the senior audience at the beginning, it means that this senior audience should also be for newly promoted people. It will always be beneficial for them to build good relationships at this time. After all, Lu Tao's mentality is different from Sudbai's. Sudbai was only one chance away from being promoted to a senior audience, but Lu Tao is still far away from being promoted to a senior audience. The matter of promotion is still far away. It is far from being scheduled on his schedule, so naturally the mentality of facing high-level audiences is completely different now. The node collapsed. Sudbai, who had just been promoted to a senior audience, was still immersed in the pleasure after the promotion. Power. For men, it is as addictive as fine wine and beautiful women. However, when the teleportation came back, Sudbai found that it was dark outside. He remembered that when he entered this node, it was already late at night, and it was still dark now. According to the time in the node, it should be morning in the daytime. Is it possible that the time in the node is different from the real world? But it should be impossible. The node is fake after all, and that piece of gold cannot have the ability to tamper with the flow of time like the world of horror broadcast stories. The fat man was not in the room, which made Sudbai feel a little strange. After the node crashed, the two of them should have appeared in this room together. He picked up the phone and planned to call the fat man, but found that the phone had no signal at all. Forget it. Sudbai found a pair of headphones from his backpack, put them on his ears, opened the door, walked to the elevator and took the elevator down. After getting out of the elevator, he ran all the way out of the service hall. The night in Guangzhou is getting dark, and the Pearl River is right next to me. I don't know why, but it seems that I have been staying in the node for a long time. I have seen the old Beijing road more than 20 years ago for a long time. At this time, Sudbai suddenly thought, run along this street and take a look. It feels like revisiting the old place. In fact, it really is the same as revisiting the old place. At this point in time, Menbis, a black listener who had just gotten off the plane and was preparing to attend a listener forum event tomorrow, had just found a group of black brothers playing happily together near the hotel. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 703. If you want to ask Sudbai how he feels after being promoted to a senior audience, in fact, it can be described by the advertisement slogan of a certain calcium tablet: the waist is no longer sore, the legs are no longer painful, the food tastes delicious, and you can go up to the 5th floor in one breath. One bottle is worth the 5 bottles in the past. The biggest difference between advanced listeners and senior listeners is that as the advanced listeners themselves improve in life level, the connection and intimacy between the surrounding space and themselves will naturally increase a lot. You are standing here, but in fact it can be said that the entire area is affected by you. Every move you make will have a great relationship with the surrounding environment. To describe it in a relatively neutral way, I alone am an army. This is an extremely terrifying increase. For example, your speed can be greatly improved with the help of the surrounding environment, and you can even control the wind speed, humidity, and other details to make your speed jump further. During combat, your power can also be echoed by the surrounding environment. This kind of superposition is not as simple as a buff. Its amplification effect, compared to experienced people, can be described as terrifying. One bottle is worth 5 bottles, which can almost describe how the power of a previous skill when it was released has been directly multiplied several times. To be promoted to a senior person, you need to fuse your natal weapons, and use the fusion of natal weapons to forcibly upgrade your life level. Advanced listeners, in essence, are also a higher pursuit of life levels. The higher the life level, the corresponding benefits. And the more. The changes brought about by being promoted to a senior audience do not refer to the improvement of bloodline or pure strength, but that you have a wider space to use and exert your bloodline and your own power, including many previous abilities. In short, it is on the same computer, one uses Windows 98 and the other uses W10. Even if they come with the same software, their running speed and performance, as well as the feeling of use and user experience, are completely different. While running at night, Sudbai was also freeing his mind while revisiting his old place. Being promoted to a high-level listener had been his goal for a long time, but it was definitely not the biggest goal. The promotion was successful, of course. It's worth being happy, but not forgetting about it. He is just trying to climb up, but Sudbai also knows in his heart that there is still a big gap between him and the man and woman. No one knows what state that man and woman are in now. In addition, I don't know if it was due to good luck. During the evening run, I encountered a strange black audience who actively provoked me. Sudbai also tried to take action. The soul flame that was burning on the other person was absorbed by his own. With the power of ice, the ice is instantly extinguished. This is crushing, complete crushing. It wasn't until he casually froze the opponent and threw it into the trash can that Sudbai truly realized that he had really drawn a clear line between himself and the group of seniors. The difference in strength was too big. In the past, Sudbai could only say that he was not afraid of anyone in a duel among seniors. He could basically win. If it was a 1v2, it would be more troublesome and he might even be injured. But now, 4 or 5 seniors are attacking him together. I can also solve it calmly. It's no wonder that the high-level audience is so aloof, because the gap between the two sides is really too big. After the strength is not in the same class, equal dialogue and communication naturally become a luxury. The matter of the black audience was just a small episode for Sudbai. Now that he has been promoted to a senior audience, he can now be free to do some things that he had left behind before. For example, Buddha once said that an ancient corpse for him has been transported long ago. When I arrived at Lao Fang's house in Shanghai, I had been practicing self-mutilation training on a deserted island, but now I could take the time to go back and have a look. Fatty disappeared, and Sudbai could understand. At least this time, Fatty did it in a very honest way, but he seemed to have really picked his peach. It was understandable that people didn't want to see him and wanted to be alone. When he returned to the hotel door, Subai noticed a waiter at the front desk holding a phone in his hand and staring at him with his mouth wide open. Subai paid attention, but still walked directly into the elevator. When he walked into the elevator, Subai subconsciously touched his pocket. The photo of himself and the little guy was still here. He almost neglected it when he was promoted. But fortunately, the photo was not damaged, just slightly wrinkled. He held it in his hand. While looking at the photo of herself and the little one, she carefully smoothed out the wrinkles with her hands. Everyone has something worth cherishing, which may be physical objects or memories. Subai used to be a loner, and now, he is also a loner. The only difference is that he still has this memory left. Wait a little longer, if you are still alive, Dad will come to take you home. If you die, Dad will help you get revenge. The audience is not shy about the topic of death at all. It's not like ordinary people who would feel unlucky even if they see a hearse passing by them on the road. After all, the audience has always put their heads in the air all the way from experiencers. There are many things that should be taken lightly for a long time. Subai really doesn't know the life or death of the little guy now, because he can't figure out what the man and the woman are going to do. Their thinking and logic, you can't find a reference to simulate and compare, because they are indeed the audience circle. They are absolutely different. Even Li Ji, who originally sent Gong Zihai to the bottom of Qinhuangdao to explore whether there is really a place where he can avoid the gaze of the broadcasters, and those two have been in a car accident since they were 7 years old and are now almost 20 years old. They have been avoiding the attention of broadcasters for so long. It is an unprecedented initiative, at least from now on, and it will never be followed again. Not only himself, Subai also knew that the little guy might be relatively indifferent to life and death. Back then, he used his immature feet and hands to crawl to the demon cave. Their backgrounds and experiences were very pitiful, and they depended on each other for life. Naturally there will be a lot less falsehoods. Ding! The elevator door opened, and Subai put the photo in his pocket and walked out. He didn't feel it when he came out, but when he came back, Subai found a problem, that is, there seemed to be a magic circle in front of his door. In the past, this magic circle would have given Subai a headache, but now, it seems that it is not a problem. By myself. Because this magic circle is not used to deal with high-level audiences. Subai has seen formations that can deal with high-level audiences. Shanghai Laofang has a complete set at home, and he has practiced it himself. The power of the magic circle is almost paralyzed. It's still the result of the monk's strength. But the level of the magic circle here is much lower. As long as you are an advanced listener and use the pattern of the surrounding environment, you can easily avoid it and walk past it. The difficulty is really not that great. Fat Man Subai smiled, thinking that the fat man was playing a joke on him. Although this approach seemed a bit childish, if the fat man planned to use himself as a high-level audience to try the formation, Subai had to do it. Given this face, it seems that the fat man hasn't left yet. Guangzhou's night food stalls have always been very famous. If Fatty hadn't left, we could go out for a late-night snack together later. The formation was not without influence, but it was only a little bit. The surrounding space was a little distorted. For Subai, it was not a big problem. It was just that when he walked to the door, the photo he had put in his pocket suddenly slipped. Coming down, this slippage is a bit inexplicable. Subai bent down, picked up the photo, and then opened the door. But at this moment, Subai suddenly felt dizzy and closed his eyes subconsciously. When he opened his eyes again, he found that he was already standing in the room. The door has also been closed, but he was clearly standing at the door just now and just pushed the door open. What happened? It is impossible for me to have lost my memory, or to have just lost my mind. With my current level of life, it can be said that this kind of thing is basically impossible to happen. For a moment, Subai also felt a little baffled. Then he looked at his clothes. Subai remembered that when he taught the black audience a lesson, although he used his ice power to subdue him instantly, the opponent's flames still burned him. The position of his sleeves, but now when he looked at his sleeves, he found that there was no damage to his sleeves. If my body can recover automatically due to its special characteristics, and some minor injuries can be ignored, how can this clothes repair itself? What exactly is going on? Taking a deep breath, Subai walked to the bathroom, picked up the shower head and poured cold water on his face for a while. Instinctively, Subai noticed a very strange feeling. This feeling was the same as when he ran back to the bathroom at night. When the hotel saw the surprised face of the waiter at the front desk, he vaguely noticed it. When he left the photo when he entered the door, he also felt it when he went to pick it up. I seem to have picked up photos twice at the door. Even from the perspective of feeling, it seemed that it was more than twice. Otherwise, if the photo fell off, it would be just a very ordinary thing. I couldn't have such a big reaction. And where did the dizziness come from when I just opened the door? Subai didn't believe that it was caused by the formation arranged by Fatty. Moreover, a very important question was, if Fatty arranged this formation, why didn't he wait in his room to listen to the feeling of breaking through the formation? Taking a towel casually, Subai wiped his face and walked out of the bathroom. The humid climate in Guangzhou is indeed a bit unaccustomed to outsiders. Subai took out his cigarette. When he was about to smoke, he thought it would be better to close the window first. Open the ventilation, but when Subai looked towards the window, Subai immediately stopped all movements. Sky. When did it light up? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 704. Chapter 704. I attended a training session in Guangzhou a while ago, and a bunch of authors were together. They played cards in the evening and there was a lot of singing. When many people called out to Long, Long said he wanted to code words. He basically didn't participate in any activities. Most of the time, he stayed in the room coding. Everyone is aware of Long's habit of not saving manuscripts. At that time, another author friend asked if you should work so hard. Long said there was no way, he was used to it. After writing books for so many years, the number of days without updates was really very few. I felt that the most important thing every day was to write the updates well, and then the meaning of the day has been completed. The remaining time can be spent listening to music and then waiting for sleep to start a new cycle of the day. Long also told him at that time that he really hoped that when he really got sick, he could rest peacefully, otherwise he would really not be able to find an excuse to convince himself not to code, and it couldn't be a minor problem, at least he would have to persuade himself. I just have to convince myself that I really don't have the skills to code it. Then, came acute enteritis, vomiting and diarrhea. I have been in this state since I finished typing last night. I went to the hospital during the day, and after a checkup, I drank water for a day. The symptoms were slightly relieved. I vomited a lot today. Fortunately, I also had normal saline, but I only ate some porridge and mustard at night throughout the day, and I didn't dare to touch any oily smell. I habitually sit in front of the computer, turn it on, and face the coding interface. My head is still a little dizzy and my stomach is constantly turbulent, like a rally of anti-kings from all directions. In this state, I really can't write a story. Horror Broadcast has been updated continuously for more than 300 days since its publication. It has not been updated since the first chapter. Basically, 6K words are written every day, but today it has to be updated. In fact, for Long, there is no code in a day. He lost a day's income by writing words, but Long really didn't dare to continue coding in this state. What he wrote would definitely make him dissatisfied. Long has always regarded Horror Broadcast as his classic work. Fortunately, a plot has just ended, and it is not at the note of Caven. I would like to say sorry to everyone here and take 3 days off to recuperate. When I feel that my physical condition is better, Long will start coding immediately. He is about to get married and start a family. Writing books is Long's only occupation. He is really more anxious than everyone else to start coding to make money again. Sorry again. The case was posted on the public account. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 705. People's feelings sometimes deceive themselves. The momentary trance may be a deceptive connection and incoherence, but it may also be an overstressed situation, but the change between night and day is definitely not that simple. There was a simple electronic wall clock in the room. The time on it showed 10:45, but Subai knew that he had just returned from a night run. Among them, either his time was stolen, or something happened to him. Vaguely, Subai felt that it might be related to that node and gold. Of course, with the collapse of gold's final death node, some truths and answers are really difficult to study in detail. Subai didn't bring many salutes, and after receiving Fatty's WeChat message and entering room 233, Subai didn't have time to rest or do anything else, so when he left, it was very simple. He just picked up his backpack and pushed it away. Just open the door, you don't even need to go through the checkout procedures. Walking to the elevator entrance, Subai saw a man about 30 years old waiting there. He said he was waiting because he didn't look obviously impatient when he was standing there, and he wasn't waiting for the elevator. With a little bit of humility. People nowadays are very impetuous, and the audience is the most impetuous among impetuous people. Standing in a not-so-fun place and being so calm without playing with your mobile phone or looking around already shows a relatively strong purpose. Sex. Moreover, Subai could tell the other party's strength level at a glance, senior to mid-level. The huge changes brought about by being promoted to a senior audience still require Subai to spend more time to slowly master and become familiar with them, but some changes are very direct. For example, you can see the strength level of that person at a glance. This was really true before. Unable to do so, Subai could only make rough guesses based on the aura the other party exuded. Subai didn't change his clothes, he was still in his black sportswear, so Lu Tao recognized Subai at a glance. Of course, Lu Tao had been standing here before, staring in the direction of room 233. Grown-ups. When Subai came over, Lu Tao naturally bowed slightly and saluted briefly. There is a strict hierarchy among the audience, but although the lower ones call the upper ones sir, they don't really need to kneel down and raise their buttocks high like in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Generally speaking, it can be done to save face. That's okay, even if you don't plan to hug someone's lap or get any benefits, you don't even need to call him sir. Similar to Subai, he seems to have never called anyone in a higher position sir. Of course, everyone has a different path and different personalities. At least from a general perspective, the title sir is actually quite common. Half of them want to get protection and guidance, and the other half simply want to make 2 nice calls without losing a piece of meat. People who come and go step by step with their heads tied around their waists come and go. There are so many red tapes in their minds, and there is nothing they can't look away from. Subai nodded. He did not ask who Lu Tao was. Although Subai did not know him, as he felt when he was promoted to a senior listener, it was not that the senior listeners deliberately pretended to be arrogant, but because the senior listeners were indeed similar to the senior listeners. It is no longer on the same level, just as a college student would not do anything to discuss academic issues with primary school students as long as he is in his right mind. Where is Zhang Bai? Subai asked. The embarrassment in Lu Tao's eyes was fleeting. He had no choice but to introduce himself, but his attitude was really cold. For a moment, Lu Tao also understood that although the other party was a newly promoted senior audience, but the other party seems to be too lazy to accept the younger brother, even though he is the administrator of the audience forum and has very convenient news channels. Zhang Bei, he is in a Cantonese restaurant outside the hotel. Sir, you can rest in the room for a while, and I will call him for you. Forget it, I'll go by myself. Subai walked into the elevator and pressed the button. Lu Tao also walked in. The two of them got off the elevator together and left the hotel. Under Lu Tao's guidance, the two of them came to the Cantonese restaurant together. At this time, they happened to meet a group of listeners coming out of there. Lu Tao took the initiative to walk up and ask, while Subai stood there. Zhang Bei was not among the people who came out, so Subai roughly guessed something. Sure enough, when Lu Tao returned to him, the answer he got was similar to Subai's guess. The fat man immediately urinated in the middle of the table and disappeared. He ran away at the most exciting moment of the story. Subai knew clearly that Fatty didn't want to see him again, which was in line with Fatty's personality. On the one hand, this opportunity was something that Fatty himself desperately longed for, but he got the peach from him. Even though Fatty helped him get promoted in the end, Fatty didn't. He also shouted that this time's incident and all the previous grudges had been wiped out. This had already marked that the fat man had really decided to leave. This time it was no longer like the last time when the fat man left. He gave himself a corpse of a Qin soldier, and the two of them still had some unresolved feelings. On the other hand, although several people have lived together for a long time, the competitive relationship between them is also very obvious. When Subai first entered horror broadcasting, Fatty was stronger and more qualified than him. Everyone was senior before. It makes sense to say who is stronger or weaker. After all, there are specialties in the art, but now he is a high-level listener. With Fatty's strong character, if he doesn't break through to become a high-level listener, he probably won't be able to stand in front of him again. And will not give myself the chance to meet him again. Even after Fatty becomes a high-level listener, the relationship between the two people may not be the same as before. The word friend in a friend means two strings of money. Only when the money is equal can we become friends on equal terms. The biggest reason why Subai's relationship with Chu Zhao and Suner is so much more estranged than when they formed the murder club is actually it was also here that Subai never denied it. But no matter how good a friend is, if we don't keep in touch often, when we meet again in the future, ideally we can still have a drink, but if it's more casual, we may just be a casual acquaintance walking down the street. Sir, this is my business card. It has my contact information on it. If you need me someday, you can give me my instructions directly. Lu Tao handed over a business card. Subai glanced at the business card and said with some surprise, "Audience forum." "Yes, my lord." Yes, Subai nodded, turned, and left. Since the fat man left, there was no need for him to stay anymore. He just came out of the node last night, and he was still a little excited about being promoted to a senior audience, so I just chose to run at night to relax. Now, there is no need to continue to be pretentious. Besides, Subai himself didn't know what happened last night. After getting into a taxi, Subai first used his mobile phone to buy a ticket to fly to Shanghai in the afternoon. When he was about to light a cigarette, his mobile phone rang at this time. It was a WeChat call from Ji Zhen. "Hello." Subai answered the phone. "Congratulations." Xie Zhen congratulated while yawning. "Fine. You're really calm. Let's find a time to get together when you return to Shanghai. You didn't take the initiative to ask me out when I was in Shanghai before. Haha, you should be able to feel that feeling now, right? If you are not a high-level audience, you really are not qualified to have an equal dialogue. See you later." "Okay, see you later." Xie Zhen probably got the news of his promotion through the backend of the public account. Subai calculated that he was the only one who really had contacts in the high-end audience circle. He seemed to be the only one who had contact with him before. Senior listeners, such as Yan Huiyang and Piao Lu, impressed me deeply. Yan Huiyong was domineering and a bit chivalrous, and Piaolu was gloomy and sharp. These two people had not yet become senior. He was already a high-level listener at that time. If he is more optimistic now, he is probably on the way to the level of a Taoist master. Of course, it is also possible that he is still hanging around at the senior listener level. Ji Zhen hung up the phone and threw the phone on the sofa. Liang Sen, who was sitting opposite, held a cocktail in his hand and said with a smile. Has our neighbor, the detective, been promoted to a senior audience member? Yes, it's really fast. Xie Zhen also felt a little embarrassed. You must know that when they first met, he was already in the high-level position of a veteran, and Subai had not yet integrated his natural weapon. Now, both sides are neck and neck. You didn't tell him that. After you were promoted to a senior audience, you needed a quiet place to spend some time. This is because the first stage of the improvement in life level brought about by promotion is the improvement of the resonance between the physical body and the surrounding environment. This is completed with the successful advancement. The next step is the simultaneous improvement of the soul level. You may encounter inner demons, which usually takes a week to spend. Liang Sen took a sip of wine and smiled half-heartedly. He looked at Xie Zhen and said, "Are you feeling a little emotional?" "That's not true. I've had more contact with him than you. His mental tenacity is incredible. Even if you don't remind him, it'll be fine." That's not necessarily the case. The taxi stopped in front of the Baiyun airport terminal. Subai got out of the car. He chewed the cigarette in his mouth for a long time without lighting it. At this time, he lit it again. There were still 3 hours before the plane took off. Subai, also take your time and stand outside to enjoy the wind for a while. An adult who has been promoted to a high-level audience is squatting next to the trash can in front of the terminal gate with a bag on his back, smoking a cigarette and playing with his mobile phone. This style of painting is indeed very inconsistent, but it is possible. Only Subai knew in his heart that becoming a high-level audience was just the first threshold he had to cross. His goal was not to simply enjoy the pleasure of increased strength and status after promotion. What he wanted to do, even if he was already a high-level audience, the listeners themselves are still not qualified. The road is long and long, Subai now fully understands. After smoking a cigarette, Subai stuffed it into the trash can, stood up, and prepared to enter the terminal, but at this moment, a burst of crying came leisurely. Son, son. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 706. Son, son, my son, my son. The calls are a little desolate and a little sentimental. They may not be so intense emotionally, but they still capture the true charm of plaintiveness under their subtlety. Subai was no longer the young man who had just killed someone in a nightclub and still felt a little nervous. At this time, even if he heard the women's cries of son, son suddenly reaching his ears, he still felt nervous. It's calm. Looking around, Subai didn't find any women with miserable expressions around. Of course, Subai also knew that this voice that could pierce his soul so clearly should not be uttered by ordinary people. Son, son, my son, my son. The sound continued, but Subai still couldn't notice it. However, one thing was certain, the other party seemed to be getting closer and closer to him, if distance learning could work at this time. Subai's eyes narrowed slightly. At this time, his first reaction was that a listener with enhanced spirituality was hiding in the dark to attack him, but when he thought about it, he felt something was wrong. Could it be that the other party didn't know that he had already? You have been promoted to a senior audience, so you have such a good attitude to seek revenge on yourself? If the other party is a high-level audience, then it makes even more sense. The high-level audience circle and the senior audience circle are two completely different circles. No matter how much I have offended people in the past, at least I have never offended any high-level audience to my death, and forced them to seek revenge on themselves right after they were promoted. So what is going on with this sound? For some reason, Subai felt that his state of mind was disturbed by this sound. This was what surprised Subai the most. With his current state of mind, although it could not be that profound, it might even be better than that of a monk. Gyatso is much weaker, but because of his special experience and his almost twisted personality, he has formed a terrible psychological defense line that makes even monks envious, even if the radio in the story world is specially designed to target the audience. Psychological traps rarely work on yourself. But right now, just outside the airport terminal, my mood suddenly fluctuated. Suddenly, Subai suddenly turned around. Behind him was the glass wall of the terminal building. But when Subai turned around, he saw that in addition to himself, there was also a patient with a haggard face and clothes reflected in the glass. Dressed woman. The woman's eyes were empty and confused. It seemed that Subai was not in her eyes at all, but the person he was calling was obviously Subai. She kept walking out, as if she wanted to get out of the glass. Her arm slowly opened up, as if she planned to hug Subai, but her face was blank. This is not a ghost. Nor is it a spirit. Subai was sure of this, because he didn't feel the ghost energy, and it didn't seem to be an illusion used by others against him. Subai didn't know which spiritual powerhouse person could do it without any foreshadowing or preparation. You can successfully disrupt your state of mind right from the first word. Even though Subai has just been promoted to a senior audience and is not very clear about the status of the senior audience circle, and it can almost be said that he has a black eye, Subai also concluded that even the spiritual enhancers among the senior audience are not very clear. You can't do this to disturb your mood in an instant, right? Could it be that the boss-level audience was so idle that they came out to deal with him? That's even more impossible, not to mention that after the last batch of trains left, there are still a few big-name listeners left in the two mainstream listener circles in the East and the West. Even if they have just been promoted in recent years, there are not many. I really don't have the face to attract others to come and deal with me, and I'm so arrogant. So, who is this woman? Son, my son. The woman's arm slowly penetrated the glass, as if she was about to hug Subai into her arms. Subai just stood there without moving, and the woman's hand slowly hugged him. Subai was thinking, who is this woman? If someone can disrupt one's state of mind in an instant, it is likely to be someone who is related to oneself, or even has a very close relationship. In this case, the options are actually very small, and the vision is much clearer. First of all, this woman cannot be Su Yuhang's wife, that is, his cheap mother. With that woman's character and behavior, it is not so much that she turned into such a haggard appearance and ran out crying, "Son, please hug me." Hug, it would be better to let her slap her forehead and destroy herself, causing her soul to fly away. That woman would never be able to do the kind of thing in front of her, nor could she assume such a posture. She could directly borrow her sister's body and then let her go home and lie on the bed to rot without any care. She could knead and play with her son as if he were a test subject. It is absolutely impossible for a woman like this to be her. So, who else? Son. The woman hugged Subai. She had no weight, not even a soul body. She seemed to be a ray of obsession or longing. In short, it could not be called a specific energy form. Subai didn't know why this happened, because no one had told him that senior listeners would immediately face the troubles of inner demons after being promoted. Only by retreating to eliminate the troubles of inner demons can the soul be transformed along with the body. But at least now, Subai could guess this woman's identity through elimination. Subai still remembered that in the memory scene, he stumbled into a ward and saw a woman lying on the hospital bed with a swollen belly. At that time, Subai already felt that it was his mother, but then, the woman in his memory, mom and dad, showed up. In other words, the woman who appeared in the glass should be the surrogate woman that the man and the woman found. She actually wasn't dealt with. With the characters of that man and woman, they would naturally not show mercy to anything that threatened them. This woman should still be alive now, but her longing for him made him feel it, and even triggered this reaction. Is it because he was promoted to a senior audience? Son, son. The woman kept mumbling. Subai now finally understood the reason for his previous fluctuations in mood. He should have been surrogately conceived by this woman. Although he was pregnant for such a long time, although there was no DNA relationship, there must be a subtle connection. Who, or what was the reason, caused this woman to have such a resonance with him? Where are you? I came to see you, Subai asked calmly. I'm in Uixiu, CIAI hospital, my son, my son. The woman said in a confused voice. Her current physical condition should not be very good. What's your name? Subai continued to ask. Wang Ijuan, son, son. Subai now felt as if he was talking to a woman who was sleeping and talking in her sleep. After learning the location and name, Subai took a step back. The woman hadn't noticed it yet. She really couldn't notice it. When Subai moved away, the image on the glass gradually dissipated. He stretched out his hand to stop a car again, and Subai got into the car. CIAI hospital in Uixiu district. Subai reported his position with a smile. At the same time, he tapped his fingers gently on his knees and whistled. The whistle was Only Mother is Good in the World. Originally, the driver wanted to tease Subai about why he whistled this song, but after he glanced at Subai's cold eyes in the rearview mirror, the driver shuddered subconsciously and hurriedly concentrated on driving, not daring to ask any more questions. The tune Mom is the Only One Good in the World was playing in the car, but the atmosphere in the car was getting colder and colder. The woman in bed 2 in room 305 started talking in her sleep again. Haha, go and have a look. I'm not going. It's not like you don't know that woman's virtues. Her own children are too lazy to care about her. What will happen to me if I go? 2 nurses were drinking water and chatting casually at the nurse's desk. Hey, I heard that the woman's life was very exciting. She first followed a worker in our local paper mill and gave birth to a boy and a girl. Then she ran away with another rich man. 3 years later she didn't want her anymore, but she came back with a shameful face, and her ex-husband was also very cowardly, yet he actually accepted it again and was able to live his life as usual. That's not all. Although they are both women, it is really hard for me to understand her. You tell me, I was deceived by a wild man before and came back shamelessly. Your ex-husband is still willing to continue to live with you, so just live a down-to-earth life. Well, I ended up having sex with other workers in the mail factory and the workshop director. Haha, my mother used to work in that factory, and many men in the factory had sex with her. This was a real bus. In those years my mother watched my father closely, just to guard against her. Really, so avant-garde. Why are you so avant-garde? When the 2 children were in junior high school, they were fooled around by other men and were caught by the wife and her parents. It is said that they were stripped naked and rushed to the street that day. You think this is what a mother is like? How can the 2 children have the dignity to continue going to school? Later, her belly became pregnant again, and it was too late to find out. The doctor said that she had had too many abortions in the past, and it was too late to find out. If she had another abortion, her life would be in danger, so she had no choice but to give birth. Her man probably knew in his heart that he was going to die. He knew that it was not possible. His own son was so angry that he drank too much and was hit by a car on the road. It's fine now. The twins were stillborn, and now she is a mother of 4. Do the 4 children still recognize her? What do you think you should admit? Tell me. If this woman still knows something about good and bad things. She is old and has a chronic disease herself. She still doesn't know how to be more knowledgeable. She can still make a living with a few children. Keep fooling me? I have met those children, and the youngest is about the same age as me, but they are all honest and responsible people. Even if it is so embarrassing to be a mother, I will not say that I will be cruel and not raise her, but she is good and has always disliked her. His children gave him too little money, and they clamored every day to find another son. Another son? Yes, she said that she was taken away by someone before she was born. She was taken away by a wealthy family. That family was rich. Oh, it's true. Who knows? Yes, she is still calling her son. She must be calling her rich son to come back to her and give her money to spend, haha. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 707. The taxi stopped at the entrance of CIAI Hospital. Sudbai opened the door and got out of the car. In the hot and humid climate, the pedestrians and vehicles on the entire road were a little wilted, but Sudbai looked very dry. It seemed that the surrounding climate had no effect on him at all. He held his backpack in one hand and walked straight towards the fruit shop on the side of the hospital entrance. Generally speaking, there is always a shortage of fruit and milk sellers on the street in front of the hospital. After a while, Sudbai walked back into the hospital gate with a box of milk and a fruit basket. CIAI Hospital is a small private hospital. Sudbai walked into the inpatient building, reported the name Wang Ijuan at the front desk and quickly found the location of the ward. Slowly walking up the stairs, step by step, Fatty once asked Sudbai if he was interested in finding his biological mother. Sudbai directly rejected it because he thought it was boring. This time, Sudbai also felt bored, but because of the strange resonance in front of the airport terminal, Sudbai could not continue to ignore it, so he had to come here. Sudbai didn't think it was a coincidence that something like this happened just after he was promoted to a senior audience, nor did he think it was the so-called birth mother's great maternal love that moved the world that made him feel it. Arriving at the door of the ward, Sudbai opened the door and went in. There were 3 beds in the ward, but at this time, only the middle bed had a haggard woman in patient clothes lying on it. The beds on both sides were empty, but in this hospital there are actually quite a lot of patients. It may be because other patients really can't bear to stay in the same ward with Wang Ijuan, so the hospital can only make this arrangement for the time being. It is indeed very comfortable for a person to live in a ward alone in the hospital. Things. When Sudbai came in, Wang Ijuan was asleep, and the quilt showed signs of being moved. Her arms were outside the quilt, and she turned half sideways, as if a child had kicked the quilt while sleeping. But Sudbai could tell that she was actually making a hug gesture, and Sudbai even knew who she was hugging. Sudbai placed the fruit basket and milk beside the bed, and then Sudbai sat down on the empty hospital bed next to it. He took out a cigarette and lit it, not caring that this was a hospital or that there was a patient lying in front of him. When I first walked in, I passed by the nurse's desk. 2 nurses were chatting. Sudbai's hearing was very good, so he could hear clearly. It seemed that his biological mother was really a free-spirited person. As if stimulated by the smell of smoke, Wang Ijuan's eyelids began to tremble, and she must be about to wake up. Sudbai still sat there and continued to smoke. Who are you? As soon as Wang Ijuan woke up, she saw a man sitting on the bed opposite her who was smoking. She was so frightened that she grabbed the quilt with both hands. When she found that the man was sitting there smoking and not making any other movements, she calmed down a little. Put down some snacks. Come to see you, Sudbai said. Who are you? Wang Ijuan continued to ask. I really don't know you. Sudbai shook his head. Yes, you don't know me, and I really don't want to know you. You are you, and I am me. You were given birth to me by surrogate, but since that man and woman are willing to let you live, they should. I think you won't do anything bad, and at the same time, they should have given you enough benefits, otherwise you wouldn't say that I was taken away by a wealthy family. I still remember that the last time I was in the hospital, the bloody corpse lying in the morgue was talking in his sleep and called out the name of his deceased wife. Finally, through the nurse on duty, he called the fat man who was the family member registered by Sudbai and said, the two words Yezi. Sudbai himself didn't know why he suddenly thought of this. That thing seemed to have no similarity with the situation in front of him, but he suddenly thought of it, as if there was a deep connection between the two things. Sudbai stood up, walked to the bed, and opened the window. Most of the windows in the hospital are fixed like those in hotels, and the opening angle is very small, so the air circulation in this ward is really poor. In addition, Sudbai is still smoking. After receiving Sudbai's reply, Wang Ijuan began to cough. Can this disease be cured? Sudbai exhaled another puff of smoke and asked. Wang Ijuan's disease is indeed difficult to cure, so she can only continue to recuperate. Speaking to a patient like this is indeed not an appropriate way to see a patient. Who are you? Wang Ijuan raised her voice. The man in front of her was wearing a black sportswear, with a strong smell of dust. His hair was a little scattered, and there were many stains on his body. He looked like a migrant worker who went out to work. Although the wages of migrant workers are now rising all the way, and even cannot compare with some so-called white-collar workers, Wang Ijuan still did not connect the Sudbai in front of her with the son she just called and hugged in her sleep. Just like Fairy Zixia in Journey to the West once said that her husband would come to marry her on the colorful auspicious clouds, in Wang Ijuan's heart, she had imagined more than once that the son she had conceived as a surrogate would one day drive a car. Hao Che found himself, hugged him, and cried, and promised to take good care of him in return for his upbringing. What girl doesn't have a child, but ants also have the right to have a child. And judging from Wang Ijuan's life experience, she is indeed a woman who prefers to pursue romance. It's a pity that she is not a poet, otherwise she would be praised for living a free life. Very carefree. A smile appeared on Sudbai's lips. He still faced the mirror with his back to Wang Ijuan. Was he the man and woman who took him out of this woman's belly more than 20 years ago? He stayed in this woman's belly for 10 months. Seeing that Sudbai still didn't answer her question, Wang Ijuan stretched out her hand to press the button to call the nurse. At this time, Sudbai turned around and looked at Wang Ijuan. 25 years ago, you gave birth to me. Some people like to compare life to crossroads. In fact, everyone is constantly making choices in this life. Just like Wang Ijuan's choices, she has actually tasted the bitter consequences of her choices again and again. After all, she is not a saint, nor is she an audience who can completely ignore society. She has not reached that level yet, so she will naturally be criticized for what she has done. Understand the pressure and condemnation from this society. But she was still unwilling to give in, and she never really regretted it. When she was young, she felt that she lived a very cool life, and she even pointed at some housewives who were washing clothes by the public sink in the factory and laughed at them more than once. The men in front of her were not attractive at all. Of course, some of them came up to her fiercely and pulled her hair and started beating her, but there were also some who were so aggrieved that they just sat there and continued to wash clothes while wiping away tears. But now that I am getting older, just like in Peepa Singh, my younger brother joins the army and my aunt dies, and the twilight passes and the morning comes, the color is old. When people are old, they always like to remember, and even try to reflect, but Wang Ijuan did not reflect, nor did she even though she bowed her head to her 4 children, she still felt that her life was still full of hope. In her eyes, these 4 children were useless, and none of them were well developed. Then, she began to miss the son who had been taken away. Even at that time, She did not know what the so-called surrogacy meant, nor did she know the actual meaning of surrogacy. If we test her blood with Sudbai's blood, there will be no relationship at all in DNA. But she is still full of expectations and fantasies. She is a woman who cannot live without her fantasies, starting from when she was a child, when she grew up, and now when she is old. When Sudbai said that sentence, Wang Ijuan's reaction was to hold her head first, and then looked at Sudbai in horror. I don't know if the man and the woman can tell you their names. The man's name is Su Yuhang. Ah 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 ah. Wang Ijuan started screaming, but the entire ward was blocked by Sudbai. Wang Ijuan's screams could not be heard outside. When Wang Ijuan screamed, Sudbai still stood there with a smile on his face, watching. Looking at the woman who looked a little hysterical on the hospital bed. I know Su Yuhang's name. Suddenly, Sudbai found that things seemed to be getting more and more interesting. Why did his cheap parents not kill this woman in the first place? They even gave her money and told her their names. This was not the behavior of that man and woman at all, especially after Sudbai learned about his life experience and saw his aunt's body slowly rotting on the bed. The attitude of the man and the woman toward Wang Ijuan seemed to be too good. Wang Ijuan's screams gradually became hoarse, and her whole body seemed to have been drained of all her energy and energy. To describe it in more abstract terms, it was like her hopes and fantasies were drained away. Sudbai walked up to Wang Ijuan and stared at Wang Ijuan. Wang Ijuan suddenly gasped for air, rolled her eyes, and fainted on the hospital bed. Unfortunately, this was not a Korean drama, and Wang Ijuan was destined not to become the heroine in a Korean drama. He just fainted, but he will not die. Sudbai sat down by the bed and said to himself, You know, I originally planned to kill you when I came here, because I don't know why I can hear you talking in your dreams. This is really, very annoying, and you can also become my inexplicable the inner demons that show up, it's really, really funny. Sudbai casually opened Wang Ijuan's bedside table. There were Wang Ijuan's mobile phone and wallet. Sudbai took out the wallet with a black and white photo inside. In the photo is a young Wang Ijuan and a man wearing brand new work clothes. The man is very thin and not tall, and is not worthy of the dazzling Wang Ijuan at that time. But they are married, so the man is smiling happily, while Wang Ijuan is stern. Face, it was obvious that she was not very satisfied with her marrying to the man around her. At that time, Wang Ijuan's mind should have been about things like coffee, sunshine, and beaches, but marrying a paper mill worker meant that these fantasies of hers, it really can only be reduced to fantasy. Did this man get hit by a car while walking on the road after drinking alcohol? Sudbai frowned slightly. She had heard the two nurses chatting before and knew that Wang Ijuan's husband was in grief and anger because Wang Ijuan cuckolded him again, so he drank to relieve his sorrow and was hit by a car while walking on the road. But now it seems that, things seem a little not so simple. Because why do so many people die in car accidents? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 708. According to Sudbai's temper, he had really planned to bring some fruit and milk to visit Wang Ijuan, recognize Wang Ijuan, cry and express their feelings to each other, and then look forward to a bright future of mutual support before turning around and breaking her neck. Because the previous call outside the airport terminal had already made Sudbai determined to kill Wang Ijuan in his heart. Her existence could actually affect him. This alone was enough reason to kill her. But according to the information we have now, Wang Ijuan's husband, that is, the worker in the paper mill workshop, looks really unusual. He may even be an audience member, and he was in the same period as her cheap parents. Audience. Otherwise, Sudbai really couldn't figure out why the man and the woman were so polite to Wang Ijuan. Not only did they not humanely destroy Wang Ijuan, they actually gave her money in a down-to-earth manner. Of course, This can also be understood to mean that the man and the woman really seem to think that using money to find a surrogate is a normal thing. They just wait until the pregnant woman's belly is big and take out the child. After giving the money, the pregnant woman does not care at all. Knowing who they really are and everything, basically there will be no trouble or clues left behind. But the most unreasonable part of the problem is why this surrogate woman named Wang Ijuan actually knows Su Yuhang's name. How is this possible? Judging from Su Yuhang's status at that time, he was already planning how to avoid the gaze of the broadcasters. He was at least a high-level listener. Looking at Sudbai's previous attitude towards the forum administrator Lu Tao, even the high-level listeners were too lazy to go. How could he suddenly become a corporal and tell his name to a woman who was surrogate for money, even if he had exchanged something with a senior person? According to the rules of broadcasting, some people must not be touched. First of all, listeners are not allowed to fight for no reason without an absolutely reasonable cause and effect relationship. The other rule is that the immediate family members of the listeners, any immediate family member of the listener, relatives or people whose relationship is equivalent to immediate relatives also enjoy the same treatment. So, in this way, the reason why Su Yuhang did not kill Wang Ijuan can be found in a very suitable footnote, because she was the wife of an audience. As for why the listener who was at the same time as Su Yuhang kept working in the paper mill, it is easy to understand. Qin Yang was still working as a taxi driver in Qinhuangdao. Sudbai himself had the experience of opening a detective agency, right? Every listener will decisively say goodbye to their original life after gaining great power, and many times, it is precisely because of the cruelty in the story world that the listeners will cherish some things in the real world. And seeing his wife cuckolding him constantly, maybe this is her hobby? Although he clearly has the power to change the quality of his life, he is content to remain mediocre. He clearly has the ability to make his wife completely devoted to him, but he still continues to remain unknown. Although he clearly has the ability and reason to torture and kill his wife's mistress, he still continues to let his wife go out and have a wild life. Maybe he is really good at this? Sudbai licked his lips. This husband had died in a car accident. Either he died in the story world and the broadcast arranged a reasonable way for him to die in the real world, or he followed his cheap parents. He left, successfully avoiding the broadcaster's gaze. So, which possibility is it? Sudbai looked at Wang Ijuan who was in a coma. At this time, Sudbai suddenly sympathized with her. If his guess was correct, then this woman did feel pitiful to a certain extent. She was just wild and indulgent, but my husband is really perverted, and he is extremely perverted. Just when Sudbai was about to wake up Wang Ijuan and ask some questions, Sudbai suddenly felt an invisible net covering him. Of course, this net was invisible, but it was definitely not that kind of net. It is a rhetorical technique to describe a depressed mood, but there is a spiritual force gathering here with this as the center of the circle. The other party is obviously very careful and cautious. If it were Sudbai from before, it might be really difficult to detect it. After all, he specializes in the art, and the other party is so cautious, but now Sudbai is already an advanced listener. He naturally reached a resonance with the surrounding environment, so the changes in the surrounding environment were clearly introduced into Sudbai's mind. Sudbai turned around, pushed open the ward door, then turned right and walked straight to the corridor over there. The steady footsteps brought a kind of rhythmic pressure. Of course, the patients, doctors, and nurses around would definitely not be able to feel this kind of thing, but Sudbai knew that the mental enhancer would certainly be able to feel it. Besides myself, there are actually other audiences who are interested in Wang Ijuan? Sure enough, when Sudbai was about to reach the entrance of the corridor, the mental energy that had been floating around him disappeared in an instant, which meant that the other party seemed to be aware of Sudbai's identity and directly chose to avoid and retreat. But the other party chose to retreat, and Sudbai was not going to let him go. At that moment, Sudbai jumped directly from the entrance of the corridor. Soon, When Subai went down 3 floors in a row, he felt the other person's breath again at the entrance of the hospital building. Subai's figure immediately turned into a ball of blood mist and disappeared on the spot. At the same time, a man wearing a red coat and hat was walking quickly. After exiting the door of the inpatient building, he chose to turn right, which is the direction of the back entrance of CIAI hospital and where the parking lot is located. The young man seemed to be avoiding someone, and his position was very strange when he was moving quickly. He did not walk in a straight line, but in a winding way, as if he was deliberately going in circles. But the beads of sweat on his forehead became more and more dense. Obviously, the person he was avoiding had already put a lot of pressure on him even if he hadn't caught up with him yet. After all, he was on the run from a senior audience member. However, when he walked to the back door of the hospital, he stopped and let out a long sigh of relief. This did not mean that he had got rid of the other party, but it meant that he no longer needed to struggle. When a senior audience was so close, when trying to catch up with you at such a distance, it's really a kind of despair. The strength of both sides is really not on the same level. Subai stood at the back door of the hospital with his hands in his pockets and a cigarette in his mouth. Puff. After blowing out the smoke from his mouth, Subai smiled and said, "I didn't expect it was you." The man also shrugged and said helplessly, "I'm a little better than you. I knew it was you during the mental test just now, but you really surprised me. We haven't seen each other for only 3 months. Now that you are a senior audience member, should I bow down to you now and call you sir? It's not surprising that I was promoted to a high-level listener faster than you. In the last story world, you got a lot of other people's natural weapons, but in fact, I have a lot of those kinds of things under the bed at home. Last time I was there I picked up a lot of them at the train station, but I didn't even bother to study them." Subai walked towards the man slowly. Subai knew this man, and the man also knew Subai. Peace of mind. In the last story world, the one who laughed best and laughed last successfully succeeded in scheming many listeners who participated in that story world to death and plundered a lot of their things. It can be said that he got a great harvest, and even had an happy life. There was a chance to kill the imprisoned Subai, but he was too greedy and wanted more, so he failed in the end. But unfortunately, after 3 months in the real world, Subai was already an advanced listener, while he was still a senior. The previous efforts to go around in circles and even continuously set up mental traps and formation obstacles now seemed more like a silent joke, because the gap in strength between the two sides could no longer be made up by some so-called means. "I'm curious, why are you here?" Anil looked at Subai and asked. He didn't kowtow to Subai, because he also knew that it was meaningless, and he also knew that Subai had no reason to attack him. "Just because you just met and left without saying hello, did you commit the crime of disrespect?" He. "This is what I'm curious about. Do you have any relatives who are also treated here, so you came here?" Subai smiled. "You are so cautious, and you still use it when you enter the hospital. Is it because there are too many enemies to explore the spiritual path?" "You." Anil hesitated for a moment, then looked directly at Subai and continued, "Why are you in my mother's ward?" Enli's expression was as usual, but when he asked this question, Subai still caught a subtle change in Enli's eyes. Obviously, a mother with such a look, even for an audience who is used to seeing life and death, is also a surprise. It is indeed a very disgraceful thing. The smile on Subai's face disappeared because he now needs a little time to think about his relationship with Anil. Born to a mother? No, not accurate. Born by a woman? It doesn't seem that inaccurate. After all, the surrogate mother cannot fundamentally change the genome of the fertilized egg. In other words, the child's genes always come from that pair of sperm and egg and will not change again. She just relies on it absorbs the nutrients provided by the mother's body. After thinking for a long time, Subai seemed to have thought of a way to describe the relationship between two people more accurately. I came back to take a look at the house I lived in before. You should be the resident behind me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 709. Dalongji Hotpot Restaurant in Wuhao District, Chengdu. Because it was afternoon and there were still more than 2 hours before dinner, there were not many customers in the store. It's summer now, and it's really getting hotter. A middle school student in school uniform walked out of school and entered this hot pot restaurant. He asked for the red pot soup base and randomly drew some side dishes. Soon, the bottom of the pot was brought up by the waiter. As the bottom of the pot boiled, the ingredients began to slowly and completely melt. The smell of hot pot was slowly spreading out. The student used chopsticks to pick up a piece of tripe and put it into the boiling hot pot. After waiting for 10 seconds, he took it out and dipped it in the oil dish, then put it into his mouth and chewed it slowly. It was like he was eating hot pot by himself, but he was enjoying himself. If he hadn't been wearing the uniform of the middle school across the street, no one would have thought he was just a middle school student, because no matter his movements or expressions, he looked like he is a man who has gone through many vicissitudes of life and has a lot of experience and stories. When the student put the third piece of hairy belly into his mouth, another middle-aged man wearing white short-sleeved clothes walked into the hot pot restaurant. The man looked a bit mature, maybe because of his beard. The image reminds people subconsciously of those bohemian heroes in martial arts novels. "Oh, you invited me to dinner, why did you eat it yourself?" The man walked straight to the table of the student who came first and sat down. He picked up his chopsticks and unceremoniously put 2 plates of tender beef into the pot. Then he rubbed his hands together as if he couldn't wait for the beef to be cooked and he could devour it. "Who knows when you will come? You, Yan Huiyang, are the least punctual person in the circle." The person who came in later turned out to be Yan Huiyang. So, the status of a person who is qualified to sit at the same table with Yan Huiyang naturally does not need to be said. But this person is really a bit, terribly young. "Hey, you're really not a fastidious person, just like a friend of mine before." Yan Huiyang smiled. He has a rough personality, or he is a type of rough and fine, so he always gives people a bold and forthright personality. Of course, after all, he is a listener who has been together for a long time, so naturally he cannot be too innocent. It is naturally impossible for him to act chivalrously, eliminate evil and promote good, and he is not that idle and boring. Same as Lan Lin, right? The student put down his chopsticks, picked up the soy milk on the table and took a sip. Sigh. When Lan Lin was mentioned, Yan Huiyang sighed. Obviously, the impact of Lan Lin's death on him has not been completely eliminated. "Tell me, what are you doing in Chengdu?" the student asked. "Because I found something interesting." Yan Huiyang put a large piece of beef into his mouth and then took out his mobile phone and put it on the table. "Click on the photo album to see it for yourself. There is no password. Chen Guang, this a few photos, I think you will definitely be interested." The student's name is Chen Guang, a relatively delicate but commonly used name. It was considered good more than 10 years ago, but now, the name Chen Guang is often used indiscriminately in various romance and cliché novels, and it is really confusing. It adds some helplessness. Picking up Yan Huiyang's cell phone and clicking on the photo album, what caught his eye was the charming appearance of plump women on the bed. Chen Guang raised his head and looked at Yan Huiyang. "Haha, scroll down, you can just ignore the rest." Suppressing the feeling of nausea in his heart, Chen Guang continued to scroll down. Soon, a rather strange photo appeared, because it was an old photo, but it should have been taken with a mobile phone against the old photo. When it came out, the photo showed a large iron gate with 2 buildings behind it and a small open space with many children's toys on it, such as seesaws and slides. You remember this place, right? Yan Huiyong asked with a smile. I heard that you grew up in an orphanage in Chengdu. Then why are you so sure that I grew up in this orphanage? Chen Guang asked, shaking his phone. Intuition. Yan Huiyong wiped the grease stains from the corners of his mouth with the back of his hand. It's really just based on intuition. Apart from intuition, Chen Guang obviously didn't believe this reason. Except for intuition, I have met several other Chengdu listeners before. I met them when I was not a senior listener or even a senior listener. Those few are no longer here, or they are either died in the story world or died in the real world, but they all told me that they came from an orphanage. I'm curious, which orphanage is so powerful that it has no audience, right? This orphanage was closed when I was very young. Chen Guang showed a trace of reminiscence on his face. Obviously, this orphanage was the first place in his life where he clearly felt warmth. Although Yan Huiyong said before the message that came out clearly explained the weirdness of this orphanage, but it was the same thing. Who opened it? Yan Huiyong continued to ask. I came to Chengdu this time just to find out this matter. It was started by a couple, both of whom are entrepreneurs. I remember when I was a child in the orphanage, every time the couple came over, all the children in the orphanage would be very happy. They would surround them and call them uncle, dean, aunt. The day they come is a festival in the orphanage. Not only the gifts and toys they bring, but also the food that day will be much better than usual. Later, the couple had a car accident and left, and their son directly terminated financial support for the orphanage. Therefore, half a year later, the orphanage was completely disbanded, and the older children in it entered the society on their own. They had to find work, and the younger ones were accepted into welfare homes run by the government. I was accepted into the welfare home. Do you still remember their names? Yan Huiyong asked. Chen Guang shook his head. I was only 3 years old at that time, how could I remember so much? Are you interested in this matter now? Yan Huiyong swallowed another large piece of beef. This matter is extraordinary. Now I know it's unusual. I didn't feel this way before. Chen Guang tapped his white fingers on the table. You should know more than this. Haha, this couple has a son, who was the young man who suspended funding for the orphanage. I was stunned for a moment when I investigated him. Guess what, he was also the audience. In the story world where Lan Lin died, I even met him. Oh, Chen Guang nodded. What is his current strength level? He is probably not dead yet, right? I don't know this yet. I guess he's only an intermediate level veteran. He's dead but not dead. I'm surprised. This guy is just a psychopath and he's not dead yet. You were born by my mother's surrogate. In a milk tea shop behind CIAI hospital, Anil still seemed a little unacceptable after listening to Subai's story, but the look on his face was not shocked, but felt ridiculous and funny. This woman really has no bottom line. She dared to do surrogacy more than 20 years ago. She has really been at the forefront of the trend. Obviously, Anil's feelings for Wang Ijuan are not good. You are so indifferent to your mother, why do you still come to see her? Subai asked after taking a sip of milk tea. Because I want to see her miserable appearance. Every time I come back from the story world or come from other places, I will take the time to see her. Because of her, I have been laughed at by others in my childhood, and I even have no reason to defend myself. None, because the whole street knew what kind of woman she was. To tell you the truth, I have always heard her say that she has a rich son who will come to pick her up one day and live a better life. I also thought about finding that rich son and giving him to her in front of her. The thought of killing her so that she could be completely cut off made her live in complete despair, but after hypnosis, I discovered that she herself had no information about the so-called son. Subai smiled and pointed at himself. He's sitting in front of you now, and you can do something to him now. Anil shrugged helplessly. The first level of government is overwhelming, right? But I'm curious as to why your parents would find a woman like her to be a surrogate mother in the first place. I think normal parents would choose a surrogate mother. Everyone should be more cautious, just like parents who plan to use other people's sperm for artificial insemination. They should have a lot of inspection and evaluation of the person using the sperm. Having said this, Onel was suddenly startled again. He seemed to have grasped some important point and asked. More than 20 years ago, was it possible to perform artificial insemination surgery in China? Onel is a very smart person, which Subai has never denied. Obviously, he has discovered something wrong with Subai's narrative. Your mother is like this, and your father doesn't care, Subai asked. The reason he spent time arguing with Onel was to ask about Wang Ijuan's husband. My dad, Onel paused, a very pitiful man. I remember when he took me home from kindergarten. My mother called some wild men outside to do that kind of thing at home, and my dad covered me. He stood in the kitchen with his eyes and mouth and dared not make a sound, but I could feel that his body was shaking. Obviously, he was holding back for the sake of his children, but I matured earlier, and some things, in fact, I already know it in my heart. Listening to Onel's words, a completely different picture came to Subai's mind. A middle-aged man in work clothes was hiding in the kitchen, covering his son's mouth and eyes while admiring the scene of his wife being hummed by others in front of him. He was smiling, he was enjoying himself, and his whole body was shaking with excitement. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 710. Your dad is really a great father, Subai said to Onel. I don't know why, but I always feel that your compliment is a little bit harsh, Onel said. Don't think too much. Okay, I have some things to do and I have to leave. Subai stood up and pointed at Onel. You pay the bill. Looking at Subai's back walking out of the milk tea shop, Onel bit his lip. As a smart and conceited person, Subai had been feeling depressed in his heart from the moment they met until he left. Can often arouse anger. After all, the huge power gap between the two parties brought about this kind of meeting atmosphere that was completely dominated by Subai. For Onel, it was an insult and trample on his own pride. Obviously in the previous story world, this guy he is still just a prisoner, and his life and death are still in his own hands. If he had made up his mind earlier, this guy would have been dead long ago. There would be no chance for him to become the high-level audience he is now and show off his power in front of him. But some things have become established facts and cannot be changed. Even if he is happy, he knows in his heart the terrifying gap between senior listeners and senior people. Whether in the story world or the real world, it is difficult to see high-level listeners and senior people being roped in to do tasks by the broadcast, because the two parties are really not on the same level. For Subai, calling Wang Ijuan's incident a minor incident is a bit too light, but if it were a more serious matter, it would be too much. In a true sense, she should be dispensable to Subai. A person, especially after figuring out what she was like, Subai believed that the chance of being sensed next time she called him in a dream was really small. On the one hand, he could see it clearly. On the other hand, he has forced Wang Ijuan to see clearly. The rich son who had always imagined that he might come to lead her to a better life turned out to be just a bankrupt wage earner. The shock that Wang Ijuan suffered was really too great, no less than when she had sex with other men in the factory. The feeling of being caught and raped by someone's wife and sisters is even worse. But an Le is really like his father. His father is a listener, but he is happy to watch his wife cuckolding him constantly and can't help but enjoy it. An Le also obviously has moments. He has the ability to change the living conditions of himself and his family, but he still enjoys watching his mother, who has humiliated him since he was a child, endure both mental and physical torture. This father and son really don't need to do a paternity test, they are definitely biological. She got into a taxi again and arrived at Bayonne airport. It was already past 7 in the evening and the plane left at 8:30. Subai had passed the security check and boarding happened to start there. He sat on the plane and looked outside. There was some dazzling pilot light, and Subai subconsciously put his hand on the porthole. To be honest, sometimes Subai would ask himself, if the little guy was still with him, would he still hold on to that man and woman? I probably won't let go, but maybe I don't have the determination to do so now. Sometimes, Subai felt that his perverted mental circuit was very convenient. He could prevent himself from falling when faced with a lot of suffering and torture, but sometimes he would also suffer the distress caused by it, that is, he would not be able to deal with many things. Can't help but be indifferent to it. Amidst the violent roar, the plane took off from Baiyun Airport. Joy City is a place with a relatively concentrated flow of people in Wuhao District, Chengdu. Now this large-scale plaza integrating commercial food and cinemas is very popular across the country. However, Yan Huiyang stood helplessly outside an open-air cafe on the ground floor of Joy City. He was helpless because this place was originally the site of the orphanage and had been completely demolished. He still wanted to. It is obviously impossible to obtain any physical information from here. Chen Guang walked out with 2 cups of coffee, and handed 1 cup to Yan Huiyang. Regarding this Joy City, Chen Guang, the person involved, had a very ordinary view, and even looked at the orphanage that now looked very strange and absolutely unusual. Chen Guang is also very dull. This dullness makes Yan Huiyang feel like the emperor is not anxious and the eunuch is anxious. Since you are not interested in this, why did you agree to investigate with me? Yan Huiyang asked, taking a sip of coffee. If I were an experiencer or a low-level listener now, I would probably hate that orphanage and curse it for 3 days and 3 nights after learning the news, but I am now a high-level listener. Under the premise that the big guys above are leaving by train one after another from time to time, I don't think I have much emotional impulse to hate it. Chen Guang told the truth. It was like a trafficker selling a child to a wealthy family. After the child knew the truth, he saw that his biological parents were still living in the bungalow, and that several of his brothers and sisters had dropped out of school and were working very hard. After getting married young, can he really hate the trafficker who kidnapped him? Of course, this example is a bit extreme, but it is also based on human nature under popular thinking. Actually, there is a lot of information about that orphanage, really a lot, so much that I can't believe there are so many. Yan Huiyang smacked his mouth, burped, and the smell of spicy millet filled the air. Come out, obviously. The couple did not deliberately erase the information about the existence of this orphanage, so even if they want to find it again after so many years, it is really convenient. After all, this orphanage has complete procedures, and I was even awarded a certificate and a flag by the district and was even featured in the damn newspaper. But it's all bullshit. There is no useful information at all, not even a list. In how many years, which children have lived in it, there is nothing, including the orphanage where you were later admitted. Your name and a picture of you as a child. Haha. Chen Guang smiled subconsciously. He understood that this was not actually hidden information, but that in that era, many things were not popularized and developed. For example, things like the original orphanage were eager to get rid of them. These cumbersome burdens, certificates, commendations, and free honors were given casually, but no one really did the specific details at that time, and no one would keep statistics. In addition, the orphanage was closed later, so naturally it has become an embarrassing existence similar to headless injustice. How many children were raised in orphanages, how many of them became listeners like me, how many died, and how many are still alive are still unknown. You can post a post on the audience forum and ask. Chen Guang thought for a while and suggested. Yan Huiyang shook his head and said, no, this matter cannot be made known to everyone on the road. Chen Guang stopped talking, because there was no need to say anything. Although Yan Huiyang looked like a hero with a beard, he was really not so enthusiastic about the ancient ways. The reason why he investigated this matter also has his own purpose, and naturally he doesn't want others to come and take a share of the pie. As for why he let himself know, it was probably because he was the person involved. For that matter, he didn't really tell himself the whole story. You said before that the son of that couple has also become an audience, right? Then we should be able to get some breakthroughs from him. Where are they now? We can't find him yet. The information I asked people to find out is that he stayed in Chengdu for a period of time after becoming a listener, and then he seemed to have gone to Shanghai. But where exactly he lived in Shanghai is unknown for the time being. Then let's go to Shanghai. Chen Guang reached out and touched his chin, which at least still looked young. I'm actually quite interested in the young man who cut off the orphanage's funding. Actually, to a certain extent, he is doing a good deed by cutting off financial support. Otherwise, more orphanage children may become listeners in the future, Yan Huiyang said. Who knows about this kind of thing? Chen Guang stretched. I won't go to class in the afternoon. When will you leave? Go to Shanghai. Where else could we go? Just give me 2 days, I still need to visit a friend who lives in Sichuan. Okay, Chen Guang nodded and agreed simply. Then get in touch. Yan Huiyang pointed to the phone in his hand, walked to the side of the road, stopped a taxi and left. Watching the taxi disappear from sight, Chen Guang also picked up his phone and dialed a number. After a while, it was connected. Hey, my little Lord Guang Guang, do you have anything to do with your most loyal servant Hai? A demonic voice came from the other end of the phone. It was Gong Zihai's voice. Hi, some senior listeners are starting to investigate us, Chen Guang said. I can't care about senior audience matters. Not everyone is as perverted and promoted as fast as you, Gong Zihai said a little irritably. He is still a senior person now, and he really doesn't care about matters at the senior audience level. Can't intervene. But among us, you are the only one who can contact Sister, Chen Guang emphasized. It's difficult to contact me now, unless my sister takes the initiative to contact me, Gong Zihai sighed and said. Then next time your sister contacts you, tell her about it? Ah Guang, do you need to be so cautious? Gong Zihai asked with some confusion. Haha, Chen Guang smiled. This is the third audience member who has contacted me recently to investigate the orphanage. Apparently, someone deliberately brought this matter out.